She was just a battlefield nurse, until bullets started flying and she grabbed a rifle to defend her patients. Lieutenant Sarah Thompson had come to Vietnam to heal, but ended up fighting and saving lives in ways she never imagined. Then she met Mai, a 7-year-old Vietnamese orphan, and discovered that her most important mission wasn't about medicine or war, it was about love. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you believe that love can heal the deepest wounds of war, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this remind us that heroes come in many forms. Lieutenant Sarah Thompson arrived in Vietnam in March 1968, carrying a medical bag and the naive belief that she could save everyone. At 23, she was fresh out of nursing school, volunteering for combat duty because she wanted to make a difference. What she found was hell on earth. Fire Base Charlie sat in the middle of contested territory, a small outpost that treated wounded soldiers before helicopters could evacuate them to larger hospitals. The medical tent was understaffed, undersupplied, and under constant threat of enemy attack. "Welcome to paradise," said Dr. Martinez, the exhausted field surgeon who'd been working 18-hour days for 6 months. "Hope you brought extra morphine, because we're always short." Sarah quickly learned that being a combat nurse meant more than treating wounds. It meant working under artillery fire, performing surgery by flashlight, and sometimes holding dying soldiers' hands when medicine couldn't save them. But she was good at it, really good. Her steady hands and calm demeanor earned respect from doctors and soldiers alike. Within 2 months, wounded men were specifically asking for Nurse Thompson when they arrived at the base. "She's got magic fingers," said Sergeant Wilson, whose shattered leg Sarah had helped repair. "And she doesn't flinch when the mortars start falling." That last part was true. While other medical staff dove for cover during attacks, Sarah kept working. She learned to distinguish between incoming and outgoing fire, knew which explosions were close enough to worry about, and could start and forward while rockets exploded overhead. Then came the night that changed everything. It was 0300 hours when the attack began. North Vietnamese forces had surrounded the fire base, and rocket fire was coming from 3 directions at once. Sarah was in the medical tent, working on a soldier with chest wounds, when she heard something that made her blood freeze. Enemy voices, speaking Vietnamese, right outside the tent. "Doctor," she whispered to Martinez, who was bent over another patient, "we have a problem." Before he could respond, the tent flap burst open and 3 enemy soldiers rushed in, rifles raised. They were young, maybe 17 or 18, their faces painted with mud and determination. For a split second, everyone froze. The enemy soldiers saw the Red Cross symbols, the wounded Americans on stretchers, the medical equipment. They hesitated, clearly uncertain about attacking a medical facility. That hesitation saved lives. Sarah slowly raised her hands, speaking in the few Vietnamese phrases she'd learned. "Bacchus-I, doctor, hospital." She pointed to the wounded soldiers, then to herself and Martinez. One of the enemy soldiers lowered his rifle slightly, but the other 2 kept their weapons trained on the Americans. Then more gunfire erupted outside, American voices shouting orders. The 3 Vietnamese soldiers spun toward the sound, distracted for just a moment. Sarah didn't think. She grabbed the M16 rifle that Sergeant Wilson had left beside his stretcher and opened fire. The weapon kicked against her shoulder as she pulled the trigger, remembering the basic training all nurses received but never expected to use. 3 short bursts, the way they'd been taught. Aim center mass. Don't hesitate. When the smoke cleared, 2 enemy soldiers were down. The 3rd had fled back into the jungle. Sarah stood there, rifle still in her hands, shaking. She'd just killed 2 people. 2 kids, really, but her patients were alive. "Jesus Christ, Thompson," Martinez whispered. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Iowa farm," Sarah replied numbly. "My dad taught me to hunt rabbits." Word of the incident spread quickly through the base. The nurse who defended the medical tent with a rifle became something of a legend. Soldiers started calling her Angel with an M16. But Sarah didn't feel like an angel. She felt like she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. She'd come to Vietnam to save lives, not take them. 3 weeks later, during a massive bombing raid on a nearby village, The helicopter started bringing in civilian casualties, along with wounded soldiers. That's when Sarah met Mai. The little girl was maybe 7 years old, unconscious, and covered in blood from shrapnel wounds. Her traditional Vietnamese dress was torn and dirty, and she had no identification, no family with her. Found her in the rubble, said the helicopter medic who brought her in. Village got hit hard. Don't think anyone else from her family made it. Sarah looked at the small, broken body on the stretcher and saw herself at age 7. She'd been an orphan, too, bounced between foster homes after her parents died in a car accident. She knew what it felt like to be completely alone in the world. "I'll take her," Sarah said quietly. "Thompson, we're swamped with wounded soldiers," Martinez replied. "We don't have resources for civilians." I said I'll take her, on my own time. For the next 72 hours, Sarah barely left my side. She cleaned the girl's wounds, monitored her vital signs, and held her hand when she woke up screaming from nightmares. Mai spoke no English. Sarah spoke little Vietnamese, but somehow they communicated. The girl would reach for Sarah whenever she was frightened. Sarah would lullabies her own foster mother used to sing. "She's getting attached to you," warned Dr. Martinez. "What happens when she's healthy enough to leave? Where does she go?" Sarah had been thinking about that. The girl had no family left, no home to return to. In a war zone, orphan children often died on the streets or were recruited by one side or the other as soldiers or spies. "She comes with me," Sarah said. "Thompson, you can't adopt a Vietnamese child. The paperwork alone would take years, and that's assuming the government would even allow it. Then I'll figure out another way." Over the following months, Mai slowly recovered from her physical wounds. She learned English with the help of Sarah and other soldiers who'd taken a liking to the brave little girl. She became the fire base's unofficial mascot, helping in the medical tent and bringing smiles to wounded soldiers. But Mai's emotional wounds ran deeper. She had nightmares about the bombing that killed her family. She refused to eat Vietnamese food. She clung to Sarah like a lifeline. "Mama Sarah," she started calling her, which broke Sarah's heart every time. The problem was legally, Sarah had no claim to Mai. The girl was supposed to be turned over to Vietnamese authorities or sent to a refugee camp. But Sarah had seen those camps. She knew what happened to orphan children there. "I'm going to adopt her," Sarah told Martinez one evening as they worked late in the medical tent. "Officially, I don't care how long it takes or how much paperwork is involved. Sarah, be realistic. You're a single woman in the military. You're in a combat zone. The system isn't set up for this. Then I'll change the system." Sarah began writing letters to her congressman back in Iowa, to military officials, to adoption agencies. She filled out forms, gathered testimonials from fellow soldiers, and documented Mai's medical history. Most of the responses were polite rejections. International adoption during wartime was nearly impossible. Military personnel weren't allowed to adopt foreign nationals. The bureaucracy was designed to prevent exactly what Sarah was trying to do. But Sarah didn't give up. She'd learned from her own difficult childhood that sometimes you had to fight for the family you wanted. Then, in November 1969, Sarah's tour of duty ended. She was being rotated back to the United States. Mai wasn't allowed to come with her. The night before Sarah was scheduled to leave, she sat with Mai in the medical tent, tried to explain what was happening. "I have to go home," Sarah said in broken Vietnamese, supplemented with hand gestures. "But I will come back for you. I promise." Mai cried and clung to Sarah's uniform. "No go, Mama Sarah. Please no go." It was the hardest thing Sarah had ever done, leaving that little girl behind. But she had a plan. Back in Iowa, Sarah didn't return to civilian life. Instead, she used her military contacts and her growing reputation as a war hero to push her adoption case through the system. She testified before congressional committees about the plight of Vietnamese orphans. She gave interviews to newspapers about her experience in combat and her desire to give Mai a home. The media attention helped. Combat Nurse Fights New Battle to Adopt Vietnamese Orphan read headlines across the country. Public opinion began to shift in Sarah's favor. It took 18 months, But finally, in May 1971, Sarah received the call she'd been waiting for. Her adoption petition had been approved. Mike had come to America. Sarah flew back to Vietnam to collect her daughter. When she walked into the orphanage in Saigon where Mike had been staying, the little girl ran into her arms crying, "Mama Sarah, Mama Sarah." "I come back," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. The plane ride to America was surreal. Mai pressed her face against a window, staring at clouds and ocean. She'd never been on an airplane before, never been outside Vietnam. "America big?" she asked in her improving English. "Very big," Sarah replied, "but we'll make it feel like home." Sarah settled in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where she took a job at the local hospital. Mai enrolled in elementary school, where she excelled despite the language barrier. They lived in a small house with a garden, where Mai learned to grow vegetables like her grandmother had taught her in Vietnam. The adjustment wasn't easy. Mai had nightmares for years. She struggled with being different in a town where Asian faces were rare. Some neighbors whispered about the unmarried nurse who'd adopted a foreign child, but Sarah was patient. She helped Mai with homework, attended every school play and sporting event, and slowly built the family she'd always dreamed of having. "You saved my life," Mai told Sarah years later, when she was graduating from high school as valedictorian. "No," Sarah replied, "you saved mine. I went to Vietnam thinking I was going to heal people, but you taught me what healing really means." Mai went on to become a doctor, inspired by watching Sarah care for wounded soldiers and sick patients. She specialized in pediatrics, saying she wanted to help children the way Sarah had helped her. At Mai's medical school graduation, Sarah watched with pride as her daughter, because that's what Mai was, truly and completely, received her diploma. The little orphan from a bombed-out Vietnamese village had become Dr. Mai Thompson, American citizen and healer. In her graduation speech, Mai said, "I learned from my mother that love is the strongest medicine. She saved my body in a combat zone, but more importantly, she saved my heart by showing me what family means." Sarah wiped away tears as the audience applauded. She thought about that terrified little girl she'd found among the casualties 30 years earlier. She thought about all the bureaucratic battles, the lonely nights wondering if she'd ever get to bring Mai home, the years of helping her daughter navigate between two cultures. It had all been worth it. After the ceremony, Mai approached Sarah with a young man Sarah had never met. "Mom," Mai said. She started calling Sarah Mom in high school. "I want you to meet David. We're engaged." As Sarah hugged her future son-in-law, she realized that her family was still growing. The scared, orphan nurse who'd gone to Vietnam all those years ago had somehow created something beautiful from the ashes of war. 2 years later, Sarah held her first grandchild, a little boy with Mai's dark eyes and David's gentle smile. As she rocked him to sleep, she hummed the same lullabies she'd sung to Mai in that medical tent decades earlier. The circle was complete. Love had indeed proven to be the strongest medicine of all.